All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to City Hall again to talk about our very exciting Riverfront plan. We're doing this because we know that for the citizens of Nashua, we can deliver a really improved riverfront, something that will be exciting to people and we can use for people's enjoyment and to revitalize our downtown and to strengthen the real economy here in Nashua. But before we begin, I wanted to introduce some of the very important people that we have with us. First of all, Alderman Dowd from Ward 2, which we really appreciate his representing the Board of Aldermen. Gene Porter from various riverfront organizations, the Lower Merrimack Conservation Commission. Marianne Malizzi-Golia, Ward 8, which we really appreciate, head of the Planning Committee, so we really appreciate her coming. Jan Schmidt, one of our state reps from Ward 1. It's really nice. Matt Plant from the Police Commission. And I see James Veo, our downtown specialist, and Roger Houston, our planning director. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to introduce our friends from Halverson. But I think you will see that they have developed with your participation, the participation of many people here in Nashua. And I think the number is like 1,000 now or something?
Yeah, over 2,200.
Over 2,200 people have input into this through the website or in our meetings. I think you'll see that they've helped us come up with a really, really great plan. We want this plan to be accountable to people, to be exciting, and to really enhance our downtown and enhance the beautiful asset that we have, which is the Nashua River. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sara Marshall, who's going to introduce Halverson again and begin our presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Sara Marshall, Community Development Division Director, and I am here to happily introduce Bob from Halverson Design. And also we're working with Horsley Witten Group on all the environmental permitting and environmental regulation side of this. So I just want to quickly go through kind of where we've been and how we got here. This process started in April. And so it's been about an April to June public input period, and it's been an iterative process. So we started out just by looking at the riverfront and our project area, which Bob will go through. And then through that and through your comments, through public meetings like this, meeting with all the property owners, talking to tons of different groups, and this great online platform that we've been using this time, we've been able to kind of say what's important to you, what are we doing really well, what could we do better? And taking that feedback, we kind of then focused in on 4 areas, and we came back to you with some designs in those focus areas saying, is this what you're looking for? These are the kind of improvements that you want to see. And now the third iteration is we're going to get into some really cool, some of the actual real design work instead of just the looking top down, but trying to see some of these improvements in 3D and what they could look like. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'm...
Oh yeah, you don't need both.
I don't need that.
I got that for you. Yep.
So this has been quite a fun process. I hope for those of you who've been at a number of the meetings, I hope you've kind of got a flow of how we've gone from a little bit more 20,000 foot, kind of working our way into areas of detail, hearing what your priorities are and the city's priorities, and then focusing more on those. So we're going to have, thus far we've been using mostly plan kind of overview graphics to show you the improvements, and we're going to use a combination of things. Hopefully we'll get a little wow factor with some of the things that we're doing. I'll just use a... So Sarah had mentioned kind of we had kickoff meeting back in April, focused on concepts in May, and are honing in on some more detail. Just again, a reminder to step back that our project area goes from Mine Falls Park in the west down to Bridge Canal Street in the east, heading towards the Merrimack River, and those areas in between. And so we'll be working our way kind of west to east as we talk. So one of the areas in kind of, we had broken this down into quadrants kind of for kind of ease of discussion. So quadrant 1 is the most westerly quadrant. And as we zoom into the area about the mill yard, we had talked about the opportunities associated with the mill yard that would be both beneficial to the owner of that building and at the same time mutually beneficial to the public, and how those improvements could change the experience there. One of the overall elements that we're going to be looking at as priorities, and we're going to kind of do that at the end and get your feedback on that. But one of the priorities you guys talked about was this desire to have continuous river walk throughout the area, the project area that we've talked about. So when people could do loops or smaller, loops of the whole area or loops of smaller segments of the site. And so currently we looked at the area around the mill yard as an opportunity for creating an enhanced river walk experience, because the parking lot comes very close to the river's edge. And so in Sarah having discussions with the property owner, we talked about the idea of expanding the green so that what you see here is not the parking lot as you know it, but a vision for a transformed parking lot, a reduction in the amount of asphalt from the river's edge further in to create an experience where the pink line that you see is the new Riverwalk. Currently, down in this corner, if you could see where I'm pointing up there, is the gazebo, and that's kind of a point of reference. But the rest of this Riverwalk does not yet exist. And the idea of expanding that green space to connect the Riverwalk all the way around to over on the side closest to the Broad Street Parkway. You can see that pink line continues around as the Riverwalk element, and then provides opportunities over closer to the Broad Street Parkway for both the public and for tenants in the building to come outside and be encouraged to use that space. At the same time, because we're creating more green space around the edge of this reduced parking lot, we're able to improve stormwater runoff because we've got a lot more green space to have the runoff from the parking lot circulate through. We've kind of got two tones of color. One is a little bit lighter green and the other is a bit darker green. And the intent is to show you that both within the parking lot and on the edges of the parking lot, we can utilize rain gardens and other components in the dark green color to capture that runoff and filter it before it gets to the river, thereby upgrading the quality of the water and the reduction in sediments and such. And then we've currently got the blue line, and kind of at about 10 o'clock in the mill yard is where the boat access is to the river. And some of the things we talked about is the idea of putting out some seasonal docks there that would help facilitate people getting onto boats in the river, and even the opportunity to sit on docks and just enjoy being out closer to the water. And then as you move your way around, these kind of dashed ovals represent the opportunity for, because there's greater width of green there, maybe there's an opportunity to create a place that overlooks the river in various spots, so you get to appreciate the river. And as we move over closer to the Broad Street Parkway, in order to connect across and have a continuous river walk, we've got a pedestrian bridge that crosses over the river closer to the parkway and then goes underneath the other side of the parkway. So moving a little bit east of that now, we're going to focus on kind of the north side of the river, and just to the right, just to the east of the Broad Street Parkway. And we're looking at, again, continuing the river walk. Right now it exists down in front of the cotton building, the cotton mill, but it doesn't exist that far west. So we're making a connection over underneath the Broad Street Parkway to make that element continuous. This also projects ahead to the idea that there's going to be future development adjacent to Broad Street Parkway, and in this iteration we're showing a residential building closer to the river, and then the potential for parking to accommodate development that exists and future development up closer to the parkway. The other component we've added here is the idea that you guys have this successful kind of water feature that's down closer to Main Street, and it seems pretty dynamic and pretty interesting. And so we want to add to that by adding, lighting to that and adding a couple more along the river. The idea this would be a much more visually impactful idea to build along the whole way from Broad Street Parkway to Main Street, have essentially 3 or 4 of these that could be at nighttime really illuminate the river and have another dynamic to it. In addition, we've talked about enhancing the Cotton Mill Transfer Bridge by having lighting on that bridge as well, so that whole experience between Broad Street and Main Street is all about a daytime effect and then a nighttime kind of wow when people are adjacent to the river and on the river within that area. Now I'm going to move a little bit further down towards between Main Street and kind of the Greeley House area so we're focusing on, again, on the north side of the river. And some of the things we've talked about associated with priorities, this idea of visually getting better access to the river and then physically getting access to the river. So what we're looking at here in this image in the kind of on the north side of the river but in the water's edge is the idea of maybe a larger floating dock area where the public could gather. It'd be an opportunity to be, dangle your feet into the water or just gather on the water's edge. It also, since that's accessible by boat, you could have a boat, they come down and pick you up, or you could dock your boat there and walk into town and shop or go grab a bite to eat. In addition, the area just inland of that is where there's a substation, and so we're looking to wrap that substation in some kind of a graphic or some kind of screen so that it's less visually apparent, that it kind of recedes and the quality of kind of whatever we wrap it with is what stands out. In addition, so we've got a solid red line up to the Greeley House and then a little bit beyond, and adjacent to that area we're showing right here the idea of a seasonal boat rental, the idea that there could be a kiosk or a small building there that could serve as rentals so that people that don't have kayaks could rent them and put them into the water there. It could be an opportunity for classes and so forth as well. In addition, the pathway goes up along the roadway edge right now and then cuts back in. And we're looking for this to be much more of a river's edge experience. So you'll see that what we're proposing is from here, the solid line represents kind of on-land pathway, like an asphalt bituminous pathway. And then when it's dashed, it represents more of an overwater deck condition. So there's the likelihood that this would be an overwater deck condition, land back on to land for a little bit, and then the whole way up to Main Street adjacent to the barbecue restaurant, it would be an over deck condition and potentially a cantilevered walkway adjacent to the building there. Two of these areas, the mill yard that we showed and this other area, we're going to give you a better feel for what the look and feel of that is, because we've got some before and after perspective images of that. Now we're going to jump to the south side of the river. And again, another high priority area for everyone that's both been at the meetings and has commented on the websites has been the idea of the opportunities associated with Parc de la Renaissance, and to essentially remove all the paving within Parc de la Renaissance and have the park experience extend the whole way from the river's edge up to Water Street. And so we are trying to take advantage of that perspective that looks over the river by grading that park so that it's kind of a natural amphitheater down into the river's edge. Clean up a lot of the invasive species that are along there, replant it so that you're, right now a lot of that is both blocking views kind of at a lower level as well as upper level, and a lot of the trees are in kind of a beyond their prime state, so I think the idea of kind of replanting that area so it's fresh and vibrant has some terrific opportunities. In this instance, we're showing the opportunity for a structure that could be a shade structure. It could also be kind of a modest band shell, so that it's kind of has a backdrop to the river that's in this area right here. And then the pathway that's the Riverwalk continues through the park, connects up to Water Street, and then continues back down. And again, between here and the back of the Clock Tower Place, we have a over water walkway to make sure that the pedestrians and the vehicles, because there's an area that's parking for Clock Tower Place, so that you're separating pedestrians and vehicles in this area here. In addition, this is showing the re-envisioning of Water Street, so it keeps parking, I don't know how well you could see that, but keeps parking, head-in parking along Water Street on one side, and then travel along the other side, and the idea of new development. So we're showing in purple the opportunity for new buildings that right now all the buildings that are in that vicinity have their backs to the river, and why not take advantage of that proximity and the great value of being on Water Street, create activity on Water Street that both helps activate and have eyes on the park as well as reinvigorating that edge. So the idea that those represent new development opportunities and these little crosshatched areas represent areas where activity that occurs within the building, if it's ground floor restaurant or retail, some of that could spill out to help activate the street edge in those areas. We've tried to be mindful of maintaining the parking to the buildings that exist up here, up closer to Main Street in that area, and again, creating more on-street parking along Water Street. In addition, if you look to the east of Main Street, we've projected the extension of the Riverwalk again behind as a cantilevered walkway adjacent to the building here, connecting up with the smaller park adjacent to Main Street, and then continuing that with another cantilevered walkway adjacent to the existing building, and projecting that continuation of that Riverwalk beyond. Right now, there's no Riverwalk from Main Street over to where the library is. You kind of got to work your way through where the roadway is, but this would provide a pedestrian only kind of route right on the river, very much like what is on the other side where the Peddler's Daughter is and so forth. So we're trying to emulate that successful experience that we've already got. And if you look at the purple boxes again, kind of east of Main Street, the idea that right on Main Street we're looking to infill what is kind of a missing tooth along there, the idea that you would keep the street frontage with a lower, maybe two-story, 1 to 2-story building along Main Street. Behind that could be a new parking garage to accommodate some of the needs there, and potential for new development in the rectangular box that's closest to the river's edge on the upper side there. And then the last enlargement is further downriver, adjacent to where Margaritas and BAE parking lot and the connections to Bridge Street. And the focus here was, right now your experience is essentially that when you walk from Margaritas, the pathway is very well defined from Peddler's Daughter down to Margaritas, and then it kind of falls apart. You're left to kind of walk through the parking lot and so forth. And so we tried to work to reorganize the layout of the parking lot. Currently, the parking lot runs perpendicular to the water, and so we looked for a potentially more efficient layout here where we're showing it parallel to the water. And then we're creating, again, in the pink line shows a pathway that is separate from the parking lot, not through it, but separate from it, in with a green buffer between the walkway and the parking lot. So again, the experience is more that you're within the wooded edge than in the parking lot itself. We're needing to maintain access to some of the facilities down along the water's edge that the city gets access to, but be a much more impressive path, potentially an overlook down here adjacent to the train trestle. And the other thing that we thought was important was to improve these entry and exit points to the parking lot to make them much more pedestrian friendly, given that there's strong connections up Grove Street and over Talls Street to into what is essentially their connection to the Riverwalk. So trying to make that much more appealing and inviting to that area. In addition, we haven't forgot the south side of the river, but we've focused on the idea that clearly along the Riverwalk here, there needs to be uplifting of tree canopy, consideration of adding lights and so forth, so that that is a safe and accessible route both day and nighttime. So that's a bit of an overview of kind of these 4 focus areas that we talked about. And so when you see this, you may say, can you just stop it right there? But what we'll do is we'll come back to it. So we're going to do a fly through with a drone of the river, kind of from the mill yard to a little bit beyond Main Street. And the first part of it's a little bit slower because the mill yard is kind of the first area of focus, and then the other 3 areas of focus are more in the Main Street area. But what you'll see is the existing condition to start with. And then it'll fade into kind of the vision for the after condition. So you can see the mill yard in the background here and in its current condition. And there's no river walk along the river here now, and the proximity of the parking lot and the roadway to the mill yard is close to the river, such it doesn't provide opportunity for that. And so here's an idea of what that will look like when it's a much more park-like scenario. And again, we'll come back and we'll focus on these for a moment, so if you guys have any comments on them. And now we're gonna take a little bit of a flyover for the rest of the river, and this will take about a minute to get down to Water Street. So the next focus area will be Park de la Renaissance and Water Street. But you can see, I mean, you guys obviously appreciate this area, but you can see what a great asset it is, and the idea of being able to have that river walk much closer to the river and inviting to get to these areas that really aren't currently inviting, have great opportunities. So in the foreground here would be that where the pedestrian bridge would cross over from the mill yard over to the other side, and then the pathway would go underneath Broad Street Parkway, and the pathway would continue on around to connect up with the path in front of the cotton mill. And we haven't talked about it, but while you see this view behind Clock Tower Place, it's all paving essentially from the river to the building, and the new vision is to have that more of a pedestrian, emergency vehicle width path, but green planted on either side, again, to reduce the amount of rainwater runoff and infiltration that occurs off of the substantial buildings. So now we're going to look at the opportunities associated with Water Street. There you see the buildings in the background and the new grading that creates much more of an amphitheater effect in the foreground. Now we'll go at a quicker pace. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the transformation of the screening around the substation, the dock area, and the walkway over the water that connects up and around to the barbecue restaurant. And now we're going to look more at the focus on Main Street, where we talked about the potential for new buildings on Main Street in that open space, and more importantly, an enhanced river walk, which you can see around the side of the building and going beyond. So I'm going to get out of that because that's the highlight of those areas. So just if you guys, I don't know if you have any interest or if you have any questions relative to we wanted to again walk through kind of the before and after scenarios in a little bit more of a slower pace in case you kind of didn't catch that. We also have these images on 4 boards back there, which we can discuss afterwards. Yes, sir.
The 2 places where the Riverwalk crosses Main Street, is it crossing at Main Street level?
Yes.
It's not trying to get under the arches on
That's
the bridge,
correct.
right? Okay. One more question, if I may. All of the walkways that you're creating over the river are fully supported on structure, and they're all designed to accommodate flooding in the river?
Yes. I mean, within reason, yes. And though some would be freestanding, others that are adjacent to buildings, we're thinking about using the cantilevered system, such as in place in a couple of locations. That's correct. Except for the dock.
I think this is a terrific plan, and congratulations to Sara and your company for putting this together. I may like so much because so many of my comments have been picked up and included in the included thing. But I did have some yesterday that have not been picked up, and I've got some specific suggestions that you might want to consider before you boil and pour this into a final report. One, and this is cheap, plant evergreen hedges in front of the parking areas on Front Street and at the BA&E parking lot. Screen the parking areas with hedges, not just the rain gardens are great, and keeping the salt water out of the river is good, but you could also improve the visual features of the Riverwalk by putting some evergreen hedging in front of the parking areas, particularly on Front Street where there's new parking going in. I'm concerned about the recommended extension of Franklin Street to the Parkway. Now, you did not show visually how you're going to do that. Is it just going to be an on-ramp for westbound traffic? Is there going to be a traffic light on the Parkway so that people can come down the Parkway and turn left on the Franklin Street? My concern is that you will open a new traffic route from the Everett Turnpike all the way to the Hudson Bridge if you open Franklin Street to the Parkway. And my question is, to what extent has that been assessed and the traffic flow estimated? Yeah.
I think those are excellent questions. The purpose in this is only to make sure that we preserve the ability for the future connection. It was not to evaluate that connection. So that line is just that there is the future potential for that. It was originally studied with the Parkway, and I don't have all that information, but we just didn't want to put anything in this plan that would prohibit that future connection.
One serious missing piece that I think is important, mainly because I'm a river guy and I like to look at historic stone retaining walls, of which there's a superb example along Clock Tower Place and along the French Park, which really needs to be cleaned up and protected. There's a lot of invasive vegetation that is damaging that historic retaining wall, and I didn't see anything in your plan tonight or on the web that deals with that threat to the river, to the existing amenities of the river.
And you're talking about the one that's right at the river's edge.
Trees and stuff that are tearing up that retaining wall. And finally, and Sara may have already talked, but this Riverwalk here that extends down here could in fact be connected to the new bridge across the power canal that's just upstream from here. So you could run this walk into Mine Falls Park and have a great connection from the mill yard into Mine Falls Park on the north side of the power canal. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments, thoughts relative to what you're seeing?
Three quick ones here. I want to mention on the Franklin Street, since he mentioned Franklin Street, I do a lot of walking downtown, and there doesn't seem to be a good way to get from Franklin Street onto the Parkway sidewalks. I'd like to be able to just get there. I mean, you can climb through there, and there's a fence there, but it seems to me it would be logical. I don't care about a car going in there, but being able to walk there would be nice since you're doing all this to begin with. The second thing was, it seems to me I thought you were going to go all the way down to the Canal Street Bridge, but what you show doesn't go quite that far, right?
Our plan does, this was more, we had identified several different areas that we wanted to focus on to show the transformational effect. And I think these were the four areas.
Yeah, I just mentioned that because I live down that way. And the other third comment I had was I actually kayak up and down the Nashua River. And last year I went to, I think it's called Oxbow Park or something like that in Groton, Mass, also on the Nashua River. And they have a launch where you can, it's got like little rollers on it, so you can put your boat on it and just slide right in and slide out, kayak or canoe, without having to get wet. And those seem to be, that was a real blast when I saw that. And you might consider that there because it make it a bit easier. You could get kids in there easy without anybody falling in the water. That's it.
Thank you.
So I like what I see here. I just got back from visiting 4 countries in Europe, and it looks like we're finally getting around to doing what they've done for years. They do a lot of this type of thing to make sure that the cities are visually and efficient for people to enjoy. The only other question I have is, and I've heard other people bring it up as well, when we plan this all out, we have to take into account maintenance so that it stays like this.
I can say that some of the number very, very high in the overall feedback is that we need to do a better job maintaining, cleaning out invasives and keeping up with constant maintenance. And I think that's one of the hopes of potentially using a TIF to pay for some of this because that's a long-term funding source for maintenance that could be dedicated. So that is certainly something that has been high on many people's lists. Yeah. So I said TIF, which is a tax increment financing district, and it is a way to look at putting specific monies aside to help fund something, and that is an option as part of a way to fund this moving forward. Yep.
The Mine Street, the Mines Fall, there's like a volunteer group or something that does clean things up, and maybe you can harness them as well to do a little more. I mean, I get very tempted sometimes to come down with my clippers and clip a few things, you know, so.
Did you all have any comments relative to the mill yard at all?
Go to the next.
All right. Any thoughts or comments relative to improvements along Water Street? And again, there's, just to give you a sense, the idea with what you're seeing that's on the upper side of Water Street was just to give you a sense as to potential building massing if new buildings were to occur along that edge, and give you a sense of the context of that relative to the river.
I missed your intro. Thank you. I missed your intro, but I'm wondering, there's that new Brady Sullivan building going in on Front Street with the new residents. Will they be able to get over to Water Street easily? Is there going to be some kind of a walkway over the river, or do they have to walk around, like if they park in the parking lot over there due to overloaded parking in their new facility? Will they be able to get back and forth on the other side of the river without having to walk all the way across Main Street, you know, over the Main Street Bridge?
Their options will be the Main Street Bridge or the Cotton Transfer Bridge. And so those are their two options. And the Cotton Transfer Bridge has a trail that's abutting their parking lot that would take them right there across that bridge that would get them in that area. Yeah.
They would also have this potentially much more attractive option for getting from their site to Main Street.
So one thing that we've talked about, which I think you're incorporating in your plan, but which isn't here, is the fountains and lights which would be potentially included. So I think there are 3, and I think we got some feedback on this. There currently is one fountain that, you know, kind of sprays in the middle of the river and is pretty good, but it's breaking down and it's not lighted. So one thing that we should consider are 2 or 3 of those, because they seem to enhance the river quite well, and also consider lighting the transfer bridge. What do we call that? The Cotton Transfer Bridge, which is a pedestrian bridge which currently exists and which has been improved. And I think those things should be considered to be part of the plan.
So those little blips in the river are kind of the idea of equal spacing, the fountains that the mayor refers to. There you see 2, and there's kind of a third that, I apologize, didn't appear in our rendering.
You didn't mention that. Okay. All right, good.
Getting back to the buildings on Water Street, the new buildings, those right there, it would be either one of those would be great for a restaurant where you overlook the river, but you probably wouldn't want to have those trees be quite as high as they might be portrayed there. You know, I think that would be great, you know, like on the upper floor of one of those buildings, have a restaurant where you're overlooking the river. That would be super. Maybe not now, but after this is done.
Especially a roof deck kind of scenario.
One of the things I noticed here, there was some comment in the plan, and you really didn't discuss it, kind of between these 2 areas of where the canal ends now is the original power site going into the mills and so forth, right? And there's some note on one of the plans about redeveloping one of the 2 of those buildings right there at that corner. I know from the past, in my experience, technically I think that would qualify for an engineering historic designation, Okay, and there's a process to apply for that for the engineering societies. Also, the Clean Water Act would potentially have a possibility of getting historic designation on a portion of this area. Okay, both were involved quite some time ago. That could help attract grant funding of some sort to some of these efforts.
You're referring to the buildings in the lower left of this image, right? We haven't really highlighted them in this particular scenario.
Where there's a little icon that looks like a bridge that's over the white L-shaped building.
Right.
Right there, that point is where the canal power system used to empty into the river. I know it's non-functional and stuff, but it is an early mill water power plant, hence Lowell, the Manchester Mill Yards or whatever. Those things attract restoration funding, et cetera.
Backing up, a question on your process. The two of you or others have talked to most or all of the property owners along here, and I'm interested in the extent to which the property owners recognize and value the fact that this kind of riverfront development increases the value of their property. Did they acknowledge that? Did they push back on that idea? Because that idea is sort of fundamental to this whole Riverwalk. We're going to get this Riverwalk down to the Merrimack River. We need the property owners to understand that it's in their interest to grant easements to allow Riverwalks to be constructed. So my question is, do the property owners that you've dealt with recognize that value?
I think between community development and economic development, we've spoken to every property owner abutting this, and all of them have been incredibly supportive, and they do see a value in that. They see the value to the community, and the value certainly to them, and have expressed a ton of interest in working with the city on this project. We haven't had anybody who's been negative at all. So.
At one point, I think there was some discussion about rerouting Water Street. It sounds like that has passed away at this point.
We had that as, yeah, I think we studied that as two different options, and I think the preferred option was to continue to have it. I mean, I think some of the sense was that it would be a dead end, and that the idea of having both, on-street activity and trying to enhance the street, make it better, and have activation of the street with the buildings fronting on it versus it being more of a cul-de-sac was the preferred direction to go.
So I'll make a quick comment on the fountain comment that you made. You said they might be spaced equally along the river. You might want to look at it in terms of placing those fountains so that they draw people in, so that when you see one, you get close to it, you see another kind of a thing, so you draw them. And think about the spacing based on drawing people through there. It probably works because they're not that far apart, it looks like. The other comment I want to make quickly was on the dock that you have there, which I like, except when the water's high, I don't know if you guys remember the Mother's Day flood, whatever, a high water level. The water level, the top of the water under the bridge to the top of the bottom of the bridge wasn't very much. So it's like if a kid would fall in and they somehow get, sucked down there, and then you've got a dam right at the end of that, you don't have a lot of response time to deal with it. And I don't know if that's a issue. I mean, it's not going to happen to me, but I'm afraid that if your kid falls in there, is there some way of dealing with that? Or should you just not let people on when the water gets to a certain level?
Is there a question over here? Thank you.
3 questions, but going back to like the picture of Water Street, with how it is adjacent to the park there, I don't know, like the people that go to the park are probably going to want like a nice time. I don't know how busy the Water Street will be. It's pretty busy now, but even after this, it'll probably be more busy. So the trees there are nice, but like they don't offer any, like shade or like yeah, like a screening from the street, you know, especially if there's like band playing in the band shell there. Another comment I had on this picture was that, similar to your comment about the safety of it all, how it rolls right into the river, rather than having there's a wall there. You know, there's obviously more potential for injury and, you know, and whatnot. So I was questioning about that. And then also the one-way reversal for the other parts of the city. I don't know if that affects Water Street going into Factory Street, but I just wonder about the traffic backup. Like if you have to stop and take a left onto Factory Street and the Water Street's right there, just the traffic flow at all.
Those are good points. I think we were trying to balance, in this scenario, the wall is very apparent, and I think we were somewhat trying to use it as a benefit by grading as much as we could into it.
I like that better than the wall.
Right. Yeah, and the idea of, one thing I didn't highlight as much is between those buildings, the idea of, for people who are parking in the garage up on Factory Street, the idea that there's an enhanced kind of pedestrian-only experience that comes down between these buildings and kind of spills out right here at the top of the park, such that we wanted to avoid the idea of having to put a grand stair there, but it's essentially you get there and you're as soon as you get across, you're in the park. But I think your points are well taken relative to, you know, the idea of how do you make sure that once you're in the park, you're not feeling like you're impacted by the traffic on Water Street.
And the comment about the traffic flow, I don't know what direction Factory Street is going. I think it's getting reversed though. I don't know if that's your firm that's doing that reversal or not. I don't know the timeline of that reversal along with this project, but eventually it's going to happen, I guess. So I don't know I think you'll have to take a left on Factory Street off of Water Street. So I don't know. Any comment on the traffic flow of it?
At this point, we haven't decided to move forward or not with it. There's some more engineering study and more data needed, but absolutely evaluating this park in relation to the flow or the potential reversal or not is very important. You're absolutely right. Making sure there's not backups of traffic, yeah.
And we thought that at least going from two-way to one-way would be beneficial in that you're still having activity and circulation through there, but it'd be more pedestrianized, you know, at a one-lane, one-way approach where you've got on-street parking.
Can you just talk about the process, how you get from here to done project?
Yes. You gonna flip some slides?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll get to that right at the end. We won't miss that. Let's see. So then, this is the before and after, again showing kind of redevelopment along Main Street and the Riverwalk continuing along the edge, kind of disappearing behind the building, popping out back here, and then continuing along over to where the library is. So again, a terrific vantage point that's very similar to the kind of experience that you have on the opposite side of the river, now.
Could you go back to the slide with the dock, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment. I think this is a great idea. But similar to the previous speaker's comment, if you're standing on Main Street and you're looking into that cove area right now, it's probably one of the few places downtown where, whether we like the vegetation or not, it's really kind of green and looks untouched. And so I just think it's really important, again, to maybe have something there to give some screening. So if you're on the Main Street Bridge and you're looking across, there's the dock, there's the Riverwalk. I know we're going to do something around that substation, but that you're not just looking across like an expansive lawn and roadway and up to Water Street, because right now when you're on the Main Street Bridge and look over there, it's just this like very naturally wild, whether we like it or not, cove, but it's very green, and it's probably one little piece that you don't see a lot of stuff. Again, it's not the best vegetation in the world, but it does just give it a very, very green effect. So I think, again, some screening there to kind of keep it looking natural, so you just don't have this huge expanse. Thanks.
I appreciate that, and I think our intent, this is a little bit of what I'll call visual swindle. Our intent was, we really liked that cove and how the vegetation is very different there, and part of that intent was to try to get you down in to be able to experience this without necessarily disturbing that vegetation. And I think, the pathway connection would be in and amongst the trees more, where you go from kind of where the Greeley house is up to Main Street. We've kind of pulled that away so you could kind of see that more clearly in this illustrative.
Again, if this were Europe, the Main Street Bridge would have flower boxes on both sides hanging off the rail, because they don't have a bridge over there that doesn't have flowers on it. And then that walkway coming from the bridge down would also have lots of flowers on it. That's just a natural thing over there.
I also like that greenery there. It's a bit kind of wildish, but the thing is, if you leave a little bit of it there, it's going to attract some ducks, and I think kids like to watch ducks.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking, I don't know if this would be you guys to handle this or not, but like on this picture here to the left where there's like a light shade of green and dark shade of green, I think you had mentioned this before, but is it going to be like a lower cut grass where people can like kind of enjoy the green space and not so much like bushes and stuff where they can't like lay down and like throw a ball or something? And then also just touching upon the safety again, like, is that something that you put up signs and say, don't go past this point, just hope for the best? Or do we put, gates or something just to make sure nothing happens? Because I have a 3-year-old myself and I can just see her running like right down that hill or like rolling down the hill without realizing there's a river right there. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, those are clearly items that this is at conceptual level, and clearly as one gets into detailing and so forth, those will be the kind of things that we need to be mindful of as we move that forward. So thank you.
And I will say the green space that you see in the lower corner here is part of the Greeley House green space, and it is, we've had a lot of comments about keeping that somewhat open and green and making it more available to the public to use for putting a blanket out on or something along those lines. It is currently owned by Brady Sullivan. They purchased it as part of their process, part of redeveloping that area, and they are very interested again in partnering with the city on this project. Yeah. Yes, please.
So I grew up in London, and I remember as a child going to this place called the Serpentine River, and it's between Hyde Park and Kensington Palace. So I don't know if any of you guys have been there, but it's such a beautiful setting. And it's just, a river, and you've got a lot of the greenery, and we would just, kids just sit on the grass, and you see the ducks and all of that. And then they have people on the little boats on the river, and it's just such a great atmosphere, and I hope that we can accomplish something similar to that. And maybe we can give our river a name, like something like the Serpentine.
It's somewhat of an appropriate name. If you look at the little graphic in the bottom right, our river definitely does a lot of twists and turns. So one of the things that we wanted to do to have a bit of a dialogue to confirm, we've went through a series of plans, and we also wanted to kind of extract out of that the main priorities that everybody has as it relates to the overall project as well as the individual areas. And so this is a little bit of a language, more focused on, less on graphics and a little bit more wordsmithing, but we wanted to get your input. So just each of these areas is boiled down to kind of 3 priorities, not that that's the only ones, but the top 3. So, we've clearly heard from you guys that you want to create a continuous Nashua River waterfront walk and a loop downtown with clear connections to Mine Falls Park on the west and the Heritage Rail Trail, which is kind of inland from that, and to encourage use and increase wellness. So that was kind of one broad topic that we heard overall. A second topic was to enhance physical connections and visual access along the river for use and for exploring through use of personal watercraft, through floating docks, as we've shown, and structured decks that improve and create access overlooking the river. And another one that we didn't talk too much about, but we thought was important, and we've heard from a variety of people, was the idea of signage, that people can't quite figure out where they are and what the opportunities. With an expanded Riverwalk, the idea of developing a wayfinding signage program that both tells you kind of map-wise where you are, as well as highlighting things worth seeing along the Riverwalk and adjacent to the Riverwalk, to help, again, inform people and orient them as to where they are. So kind of overall priorities. Is there anything that you would change with that, or anything that we're missing in kind of the overall? That cover it?
Why not, right? I mean, the other part we're kind of not addressing, which is developed on its own, I guess, is like the stores and what kind of stores will be. For example, where do you go to get ice cream? In a place like this, you need to be able to get ice cream somewhere. And I'm not quite sure where that is. It could be right by the Main Street Bridge on the north side there, behind the Riverfront sub shop, or whatever you call it. But something like that it attracts kids and families for buying something. They don't want to buy jewelry all the time. Things like that. We have a lot of that.
Just a couple things. As far as this goes, like Nashua is like so rich in history, so I think a priority definitely should be like the preservation of that history, and like what in that canal was hand dug, and like I think like definitely like highlighting the historics of it all I think is definitely important. And then like the previous speaker, the kids and family aspect is definitely a priority, not just for myself, but for the majority of the community. I don't know, I think there's more like a details part of it, but like putting playgrounds on it or something, or something interactive learning for the kids, that'd be great to attract young families and to live and play here.
Thank you. We can go back if anything comes to mind. So then we're going to kind of go quadrant by quadrant a little bit. So if we're in that mill-yard vicinity, some of the things, again, we talked about was quadrant one priority, again, this continuous Riverwalk between Mine Fells Park, Main Street, the Nashua Heritage River Trail, provide a gateway from the Riverwalk to Mine Fells Park, so it's identifiable where you're in Mine Fells Park and where you've transitioned into the Riverwalk. And the idea that right now there's not really a good spot for people to park to access Mine Fells Park from kind of this end of Mine Fells Park. And so the idea of trying to create a gateway that had identifiable parking area adjacent to that was something that was mentioned as a priority. Another thing that was mentioned in this, again, this quadrant one, was enhancements that improve kind of the value and appearance of adjacent properties through the reduction of impervious surface. We talked about that especially in the parking lot near the mill yard, where the opportunity to reduce what is excessive amount of paving area can create an opportunity for larger area of parkland associated with the Riverwalk. Then moving into the kind of the second area, the idea that the intent is to create walkways on both sides of the river. In some places in that first quadrant by the mill yard, opportunities to create them on both sides aren't as prevalent, but once we get into the area where Clock Tower Place is and the Greeley House and so forth, the idea of creating continuous walkway on both sides of the river between the Parkway and Main Street is an important element. Also in that area, there's a lot of invasive species, as you had mentioned, along the riverfront edge, being mindful of that, the stone wall there. So the idea of addressing the amount of invasive plants along the edge there to improve access to the river and improve views to the river, as well as replanting in areas with more indigenous plantings. And maintenance will be a consideration associated with that. Thirdly is, as we talked about, considering the redesign of Water Street as well as Parc de la Renaissance to create a much more civic destination. I think a lot of people talked about really creating a place that people could identify as a gathering spot downtown. And so the transformation of Parc de la Renaissance to be that, while thinking about the idea of how are we accommodating circulation and parking within that downtown area. Likewise, how can this re-envisioning of Water Street and Parc de la Renaissance be an attraction for future development in those areas that we showed adjacent to Water Street and along Main Street areas. And then finally, in terms of that same area, we talked about the idea of using things that become kind of uniquely building on what's uniquely Nashua. This idea of these water features that aren't just singular, but a series of them along the river's edge. And again, I think the idea of them being something by day and then transformative at night, such that the lighting effects can be very, very compelling as well. Changeable lighting effects within those, as well as lighting of elements, lighting of bridges, the Cotton Mill Transfer Bridge, as well as these other bridges that we've got the opportunity to underlight them, could be very distinctive in that, especially in that stretch. In quadrant 3, the idea of providing a clear, separated pedestrian pathway adjacent to the BAE lot, and again, I think your point is well taken, the idea of it's important to give you an experience where you're not walking through or right along the adjacent to the parking lot, but feel like you're really in kind of more of an area that's separated from the parking lot. We talked about this a number of times, the idea that along the edge between Temple Street and the library of improving the conditions so that people feel like that's a place that's safe both during the daytime and at nighttime so that it can be better utilized. And something to think about in the long term is the idea of enhancing the pedestrian bridge at the railroad trestle to create a new crossing there that provides kind of safe crossing. It's rather narrow now, and I think the vision is to make it more ADA compliant and wider so that if you and I are passing, that we're not kind of having to scooch by each other to get across the river, and to improve the connection up to Spruce Street. And then one gentleman, I forget who, we talked about the fact that we didn't mention Temple Street in some of our diagrams, but it's not forgotten. So the idea that creating a pedestrian connection that along Temple Street really thinks about the long term to connect to the future rail station is an important factor for us to think about. We've also talked about the idea that Temple Street, right now, doesn't have very good pedestrian and bike accommodations, and so bike accommodations are just right up the street. Can we think about doing separated bike lanes as well as pedestrian accommodations along Temple Street so that access is much more inviting? It was also mentioned, so that's number 3, and then one thing that was mentioned is when you approach the Riverwalk from Temple Street, some people don't know where the entry is, and so I think having more of a gateway there, this idea of signage that identifies kind of the places of access to the riverfront is important so that people know that this is the Riverwalk, and it's known as to where you are and what your opportunities are. So this idea of gateways at all the various portals is something that I think we've heard and have indicated as a priority. I think that covers all of our kind of, so overall priorities and priorities for the 4 quadrant areas.
You know, it just occurred to me that these different sections actually have a different character to some sense. For example, we've got the clock tower, which is all brick, and we have the chimney, which is all brick. So that area would be very brickish, kind of, right? And as you go to the Main Street Bridge, there's still some brick, but it gets more and more like concrete as you go, right? So on the Main Street itself, the sidewalks are brick and concrete. And then when you actually go further east, it becomes more granite. As we go along, the walkways along there, those walls are made of, does it granite? Yeah, I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm saying is you can actually use that even when you use your signage, when you're pointing to something. You can put something on, it looks more like granite-y, so people kind of know, oh yeah, that's where I've been over here, and kind of. But that theme you can actually use it maybe a little bit, to make it feel a certain way in different sections.
All right. So
Any other just general comments, observations, anything that we didn't touch on that we missed?
Back on my pet rock of getting to the Merrimack River with a Riverwalk, it's not just because I'm a river guy. You've got a huge new apartment complex going in down there at the mouth of the Manashaw River, and it would be really nice if those people can get to the rest of downtown without having to drive cars. And it's only a half mile or 3/4 mile down there. So if you can conceive of phase 2 of this project, having a bike walk, pedestrian walk, I'm not sure that Temple Street is the optimum location. There is a lot of land along the river. There's some's got easements and it's undeveloped, and one could have a river walk all the way down the Nashua River to the new development at what are we calling it now? It used to be the Renaissance. The last I heard it was the residence at Riverfront Landing. Correct. Right?
yes, you're good.
Is that where we still are, James?
I live in that area, but there was a talk of a promenade there 2 years ago. We spent like all summer discussing that, right, Jim? About the promenade that should be built there, and I don't know if that's still where that is in the stage. I've not heard anything since then, but that would be nice. There's a little restaurant down there, though. Right. They're building for sure, right? Mm-hmm. They're building a building now, but at some point it's supposed to be a promenade there. And the thing is, when you cross the railroad tracks there going west, that property along the river is owned by, is it the gas company, I think?
Electric. Yes.
Well,
It's
I think
both.
it's
No, there's a
gas.
gas
I think it's
company
gas
first,
company,
yes.
and they don't need that property along the river. They don't use it for anything.
Exactly.
And then there is the power station thing at the end of it when you get to Canal Street. So I'm sure those companies don't actually need that. So there's probably a way we can coax them to give it up.
Certainly as phase 2, we would absolutely love to talk to them about that, yes. So next steps. The promenade is not part of the existing plans. Yeah. So next steps is we're finalizing priorities. Thank you so much for your comments back tonight. The website is still open, Co-Urbanize. If you Google Co-Urbanize Nashua, it's right there. You can add comments there. You can ask your friends to add comments there. And so our goal is we're working on cost assessment and getting a final report out, which we hope to have to you and to our boards for the end of July, August. So. Please get your comments in soon. We are going to close down the public input so we can do all the final work shortly. But we just so thankful for everybody who's come out to these meetings, for people who have commented online for a 3-month public input process. We've really got an amazing amount of feedback, and thank you so much for that. So, on with that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I imagine we're going to post some of this stuff also on the website. It hasn't gotten there yet, but so feel free to continue to chime in if there's anything that after you walk out of here that kind of comes to mind. Feel free to add to it.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you all.
much. Have a good night.
Nice work.